Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeff Overholt. I am one of the lead coaches for Golf Performance Coaches, and I wanted to thank you all for joining us here this evening, where we're going to get into some detail around junior golf fitness. I have a very close friend of ours that's going to be joining us today. Mr. Karamvir Gill is a certified strength and conditioning coach, a very close friend of myself and John's, and is truly one of the world leaders in the field of strength and conditioning, and has spent countless hours in the gym working with golfers and other athletes that are below the age of 18. Karamvir will be able to share a lot of his knowledge this evening, and we'll be spending a lot of time with many of the players in our golf performance coaches groups over the coming months and beyond. So, Karamvir, I want to welcome you to the call here.
Thanks for the kind words, Jeff. It's awesome to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's get right at it here, okay? What can you share with me a little bit of why you feel working out for golf is important for a junior athlete?
Yeah, sure, definitely. A lot of times when we first have contact with junior athletes and we go through our assessment process and everything, we find that, sitting in school all day and doing homework and a lot of the activities that are normal to our society now start to creep their way onto the golf course. So we see some poor posture and poor movement patterns start to develop, which can become to our golf game, which is very important to kind of address those and make sure that the classroom is not necessarily affecting what's happening on the golf course.
Yeah, and I think it's important for everyone to understand that most of what the players are bringing to us in, let's say, an evaluation or something, are we're seeing very, very similar trends. And as Coach Karenberry was saying, it's really based around what our kids these days spend most of their time doing. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're broken in any way, but because of the fact that they spend so much of their time in similar postures, whether it be at a desk throughout the day or even in their golf posture, they need to be aware that we need to do certain daily habits to maintain optimal movement, as Karen was saying there. So I think that's the biggest thing, and it's really just because of the of what they do now that it's very, very different from 25 years ago, where most kids and most people lived a much more active lifestyle.
Definitely. I have an analogy which I stole from another coach friend of mine, which we call movement hygiene. So if we often, I guess, that there's certain things that we all do for our hygiene, which would be brushing your teeth, taking a shower, and all of that. But what has changed the most, I would say, in the last number of years is our movement hygiene is greatly reduced. So bringing kind of daily movement and creating a habit of moving our joints through space, creating good movement patterns is a habit that we want to constantly instill in our youth athletes and have it be as a part of them as their other hygiene routines are.
Yeah, I think it's a great, and I've loved that term, Carever, since you've shared that with me, and have started to certainly incorporate it with most of the athletes that we're working with, and hopefully that will be a term that they'll all start to understand. And I think not only movement hygiene, I would even add the do something on a daily basis that makes us sweat, if anything, as well. Not only do we want to be doing things to make sure we have good movement quality, but more so, can we just do something that makes us work a little bit? Because most of what our kids day standpoint is creating very sedentary individuals, which when we then look at what they're most of them are trying to do in terms of reach this very, very high level in the sport, see time and time again that the best or the most high performing athletes in the sport of golf and in any sports typically are the players that have the most athleticism to them. So the ones that have played multiple sports and that they have this high amount of different movement skills that they can pull from any given time provides them this like massive ceiling in golf compared to the other individual that might be similar in terms of their actual golf skill but lack this athleticism. The person or the athlete will typically win out every time. You know what I mean? And I think the last piece would be really getting them to understand this, what we call this gym landscape. The players, they aspire to be playing in college one day, and rest assured that working out is a very, very key piece or expectation and habit that most college programs are going to assume that players are comfortable with. And wake up at 6:30 in the morning and be able to navigate a workout with other players multiple times a week. So if we can, over the years between 11 and 18, get them really comfortable with that landscape, then when they get to college, it's going to be even easier for them. And as they enter something like that first year of college, they don't have to worry about the physical side. And we'll hear around some of the times that what they're running into at colleges are not really very strong. They need to be equipped with an understanding of, well, this is what I should be doing in the gym. What they're prescribing me actually looks very, very different than that.
Yeah, definitely. I think comfort level is so important, to the point where actually when we designed our facility, it's set up very much like what you would see at a collegiate strength and conditioning, in a collegiate strength and conditioning environment. So we want to get the athletes kind of familiar with going through all the pieces of a good training session. And I love that Coach Jeff they're mentioning also to be able to start to identify good training from poor training and become almost mini coaches. We don't want mindless athletes necessarily, but we want them to be able to identify what good training looks like.
And I forgot to mention that Karamvir is the owner of Edge Fitness, just a world-class facility that we're going to be using quite frequently here over the coming months. And it's just a wonderful environment for our players to be around. And we've really decided to jump on board at a big level with him just because of how good the environment is. And it's a really, really key one when we're ensuring that players are developing the right habits from a physical standpoint. So, Karamvir, here's the next question that we're often brought to the forefront here is that players will and families and parents will often ask us, well, we have my son or daughter has access to their high school gym or there's a gym right down the street. Why can't they just embark on this journey on their own? Can you share with us a couple of thoughts around why you feel that might not be the best strategy for them?
Yeah, definitely. I find that when athletes train on their own, similar to, I mean, really any sport or any kind of skill acquisition, just being able to perform the training is kind of a pretty low barometer for how we want to measure training. So let me give an example here. If let's say in a training program we had prescribed a plank or a push-up, many athletes would go through and say, "Oh yeah, plank, no problem. I know how to do that." But what they often miss is kind of the main coaching points, or what does a good plank look like? Am I in a good position right now? Not to say that you have to do everything in perfect form or everything has to look kind of textbook, but we want to start to develop good motor patterns and motor or movement patterns. So it's important to get external feedback, just as it would be on the range, getting external feedback from your golf coach. We want that external feedback in the gym to develop that motor skill. I think a lot of times we look at it we look at training as just like working out. So hey, let me come in and just get a sweat on and make sure I get my heart rate up. And we don't think of training in the gym as a motor skill acquisition, the same as we would with maybe hitting a golf ball.
Hmm. Yeah, I completely agree, Karamvir. The other one that I would go to right off the bat is that if they are not doing the right thing in the gym based on a lot of the recommendations that Coach K just mentioned, there's a very good chance they could injure themselves, especially if they are in an environment where there's other teenage athletes there. And often what we see is that they're really trying to move as much weight as possible, sacrificing any sort of quality of movement, and that could often be very, very dangerous. The other thing that comes to mind is that typically, if they're going at it on their own, there's not a really good individualization of it. So a really key piece of all of our coaching or fitness programs is the monitoring and evaluation standpoint. And this is something that we've just really embarked on the past week, where we tried to get as many of our players through an initial evaluation that gives myself and John and our other coaches and Coach K a really good understanding of what the player can physically do. And that's a really important thing for not only understanding what we're going to prescribe to them in the gym, but also what we can prescribe to them when they're hitting golf balls in terms of their technique. So that's a really key piece, is just understanding what that athlete can do, and then constantly monitoring their progress. So what we see a lot of the times is there's these blanket programs that aren't really geared towards the individual, and then there's no method of what we call progressing or regressing them depending on how they're doing with their movements. So I think that from my standpoint, Kay, that would be the other thing that really stands out to me, this idea of the design of the programs. I find that a lot of athletes will come now because there's many people that are quite educated on the proper exercises to do, but the real art of the coaching is done where what order are they done in, how much are you doing of them, how little, and what do you look like when you're doing them, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's move on, Kay, here to a little more the nuts and bolts of what a session is actually going to look like for a junior golfer here. Can we get into that a little bit? And as I mentioned, it's really key that anything that a player is going to be doing in any of our phases is going to be based off the information we get in an evaluation setting. And that's something that we're going to be doing ongoing throughout the winter, and constantly monitoring and evaluating what their movement patterns are getting like, and their speed output and strength, and those types of ideas. What would you say, Karamvir, would be a couple keys in terms of if we were a fly on the wall in a coaching session, what would we be looking at?
Yeah, definitely. I think as Coach Jeff mentioned there, a lot of it's gonna depend on the initial evaluation and what the goals of that particular training program are. But in general, the nuts and bolts would be um, the first main piece of our session is going to be structured around taking some time to address our tissues through foam rolling and making sure that all the sitting or activities that we are performing outside of the gym, which usually end up with athletes feeling tight in certain areas or sore. We want to take some time to give some love to tissues and make sure we're ready to go for that training session. And then usually that'll lead us right into our warm up or activation. And I like to explain to the athletes this would be kind of the process of when we come into the gym, the first thing we want to do is, or when you come into any room, the first thing you usually do is go ahead and turn the lights on. So our activation and warm up procedure is the process turning the lights on muscles that need to be prepared for the workout to come are turned on and activated, so to speak. And then we want to progressively warm the body up through dynamic movements and into some more um, faster to get our body going and prepared for the session that's coming. Um, Usually the end of the warm-up would lead us into some of the speed power exercises, which you would see kind of at the top of our little exercise template over here. And that's where we're going to fit in our throws and jumps. So we're going to look to develop a lot of speed and power and really increase the amount of uh, force you can generate in this section here. And usually that'll lead into our strength portion, which is the next area over here. And that's going to be based around all the key pushing, pulling, getting all the joints and all the movement patterns to develop some good symmetry and balance of strength within the athlete. And then that'll lead us into some stability work, which for golf is a piece. So making sure that we have adequate ability in our hips and our shoulders and whatnot, and that usually will then transition us into the cool down portion of the exercise, which is a great time to again come back to our initial assessment and see what the key areas were to improve, and that might be some mobility work on a particular area, could be hip or shoulder or anything like that, and that'll be a normal cool down procedure, which you'll see over on the left hand side over here. And that's basic bolts of a typical workout. But as I said, and Coach Jeff mentioned at the start, it's going to be largely guided by the initial evaluation and then the goals of the training program itself at that time.
What Karamvir just kind of walked through was a sample of a given training session in one of our specific phases throughout our off-season period in our classic strength speed phase, which would typically come just prior to March break as we get closer to the golf season. A lot of the structure, so let's say in our initial training that's going to happen over the next couple months, this will be adjusted to help provide athletes more of kind of a base to work off of here. But the main thing I want you guys to be aware of is that there's a very, very specific structure to a player's session. So, and Karamvir kind of walked through each of the different levels there. And in most of the phases, this body prep that he mentioned here really won't change. But then when we get into some of our strength work and our speed and power, this is where they'll start to change a little bit. One of the big areas I just wanted to elaborate on, which Coach Karamvir talked about, was a lot of the strength movements. And that's really where most players spend a lot of their time, this idea of building strength. And it's really important to be aware that from an athletic standpoint, we want to be training movement patterns and not isolated muscle groups. This is typically one of the ways that I see teenage golfers go sideways, is that they often are training in an environment where there's other similar people of similar age, and typically teenagers are a little more into what they look like, and they'll start to prioritize building sort of muscle mass through an isolated area versus what we're really trying to do in golf and in sport is develop patterns. And Karamvir mentioned a couple of them, things like pushing and pulling and squatting and lunging and lifting, that have much higher transfer to sport. And that's a really, really key piece of this idea of what should they be doing and what shouldn't they be doing in the gym. Now, I just want to bring up one other example here in terms of maybe something that might not look exactly the same here. And this is a workout program, believe it or not, from a female athlete that I've spent some time with over the last couple of years, that's at a Division I college in the U.S. And she came back with a winter break, and she said, Jeff, I'd love to get some feedback on what we're doing here. So we don't have to get into the nuts and bolts of it too much, but looking at what we just showed you and what this looks like, it's hopefully fairly clear to see how one is different from the other, and that you might actually see a couple similar movements in here in these different circuits that they've designed that were in what we showed you, but the whole structure of the workout is completely different. They completely neglect this first piece that Karamvir and I mentioned that are so important in terms of prepping tissues and turning on the lights, as Karamvir had mentioned here. They have a lot of their speed and power and strength and stability stuff kind of mixed in together here. There's not any sort of recovery piece built in or cooling down. And then there's not a lot of room or guidance in terms of how many and how often and all that sort of stuff. So this is really what's coming at us and what's at that next level being thrown at a lot of our athletes. And this is why we feel it's so important when they're going through high school to really get educated on what should my training session look like, and be able to come to a school in the US and this gets thrown at them and be able to confront that individual and say, well, whoa, this isn't really what we've been spending a lot of time on. Karamvir, did you have any thoughts on what I just put up here?
Yeah, it's so common to see something like this from a collegiate environment, which kind of re-emphasizes one of the points that I was making earlier in terms of we really don't want to have mindless athletes. We want to really create a bunch of mini coaches so that, like Jeff said, they would be able to look at a program like this and recognize kind of the gaps in the program. So the gaps like Coach Jeff mentioned here in terms of not having adequate prep for the tissues and warming up, and then not having as much structure throughout the program and a cool down piece, which is vital. So we want athletes to be able to recognize the gaps and be able to ask educated questions there.
The other term it's really important for everybody listening to be aware of that will determine what athletes should or shouldn't be doing in the gym is a term called peak height velocity. And really what that is it's a time in a player's life where they are growing at an accelerated rate. And typically this will happen for boys between 12 and 15, and for girls slightly earlier, between about 11 and 14. And during this time period where growth is accelerated, you've got all sorts of different structural changes going on with the player's body. You could imagine that their bones are growing at an accelerated rate, and picture their muscles kind of like a rubber band, and that bone is just stretching that rubber band out and out more and more. So it's just really important when they're going through this rate of accelerated growth that they are really ensuring that they've got lots of, as Coach Karamvir mentioned, movement hygiene built in here. The other thing that's really important to be aware of is that there's lots of research that suggests that we should not be placing heavy amounts of load on athletes till they're roughly about a year after they've reached what's called their peak height velocity. So this is something that during our evaluation period, we'll take some measurements and put them into a little formula that gives us a very good rough idea when they're going to hit this peak height velocity. And then from there, that'll determine, okay, where they're generally in their growth rate, and then what can we do with them in the gym. So prior to reaching their peak height velocity or that year after they hit it, we are very strong believers that we don't want to be putting much external load. So there's still a whole bunch of things that they should be doing in the gym and can still be working on a lot of the skill pieces of the movements in the gym and working on developing strength and really, really good movement quality and such. but it would just be done without any external load, which would mean dumbbells or cables or kettlebells, that type of thing. And we'd really spend most of our time with utilizing their own body weight and things like medicine balls and Swiss balls and that type of idea that challenge them from a stability standpoint. So that'll be another term that I want everybody just to be aware of there. Karamvir, what would you can you chime in on anything that you feel that really, if a player is going to be spending time in the gym, what are the things that they just need to make sure that they're not doing in that environment?
Yeah, definitely. I'm just going to backtrack for a second and kind of echo what Coach Jeff was saying about load in relation to peak height velocity. Having dealt with kind of every level of athlete from high school all the way to professional and Olympians, it's really wise to spend the time when our athletes are in and around peak height velocity to ensure that movement quality is at the highest possible levels, because they don't really even have the hardware or software to get truthfully strong at that point. What we find is athletes that try to get strong during that time always end up with these little nagging injuries. And if you talk to any of our colleagues that work in professional sports, they'll always say, well, we're trying to get so and so athlete strong, but they have a shoulder issue or a hip issue, and all of those usually stem from movement quality problem. So if we take the time to set a high level of movement competency or movement quality at that peak height velocity or in and around there, um, that's going to accelerate all of our training goals down the road even faster, because we won't have to deal with these little hiccups of joint issues and little nagging injuries. In terms of movements to be avoided, so obviously for the athletes that are pre-peak height velocity, we don't want them to be exposed to load that they can't handle. But we also want to make sure that the movement patterns that they're performing should look athletic. And this is our super scientific test, which is pretty much by eye. But I find that most parents and athletes would be able to look at, for example, say a isolated muscle exercise, or maybe something that you might see in the traditional gym, and determine whether this looks like an athletic movement or not. So we want to see lots of multi-joint movements, similar to what you would see on an athletic field of any sort, regardless of the sport. And we want to make sure that they're avoiding maybe some of the bodybuilder type of exercises, which teenagers are always bound to gravitate towards, because looking is important at that stage of life. But we want to make sure that they're staying away from the isolation muscle exercises. And then a common one, a common mistake here, the sit-ups and crunches, which is um, often kind of thought to be a great exercise for the core. We want to avoid any of those flexion patterns, so that we're not putting unnecessary load on the spine, and developing kind of issues down the road.
And I always want to come back to this idea of, think of your son or daughter's journey in the gym is like kind of building a house. And we've reiterated multiple times here, but we want to ensure that we're not placing things like strength and speed, and in my house analogy would be more like the walls and the roof on top of a very shaky foundation. And their foundation is this high movement quality that, as we've mentioned today, typically a lot of our players don't have because of what they do all day long. So we really want to make sure that when we do go about loading athletes that are in a phase of their growth where they can handle it, that it's put on top of a really strong base of movement. And then, as Coach Karamvir mentioned, a lot of the typical things that we're seeing in the gym are based around aesthetics and look nothing like what you'd see in any sort of athletic endeavor. And I thought that was a really good point. Here's a picture of Coach Karamvir's facility here. And I just wanted to touch upon what players would need to have access to over a winter period to ensure they're getting the most out of their workouts. And Karamvir, can you maybe just quickly touch upon a couple of the key pieces or the key areas in your facility that might maybe look different from the gym that most of the players are working out in their high school or their typical big box gym like a Good Life?
Definitely. The most important piece of equipment, I always tell everyone, the most important piece that we have in our whole facility is actually not even a piece of equipment, the turf and the open space. So we want to have the space to be able to perform athletic movements and to be able to move freely. And really, a lot of equipment is not necessary. But when we do look at the equipment side of things, we want to make sure that they have the ability to have a medicine ball or some sort of ball to throw, a wall to throw it at. So we have like a cinder block wall there, but any kind of solid wall to throw the ball at. And then we can use tools such as dumbbells, cables, bands, and then we have suspension trainers there as well. We have mini bands, and the Swiss ball or yoga ball is a commonly used piece of equipment. But as I said at the start there, the most important part for us would just be open space to be able to move like an athlete.
Very reasonable that depending on the size of your basement, if you equip it with a couple of the pieces that Karenvir had mentioned, you could build yourself a really good golf fitness gym for easily under $500 and give your athlete kind of a really good space to do a lot of this work. Some of the larger amounts of space that you see in the picture that Karenvir was mentioning, that's really where come to a really high quality facility like Edge Fitness is really gives them a massive advantage where we look at doing a lot of our explosive training where we're doing lots of jumps and throws. Most people just don't have access to that or don't have the ability to do that at home or at their local gym where they need lots amount of space. They need something really hard to throw something against, and that's a really key piece of the facility here. If you're at that pre-PHV phase, then you even really need less equipment, and it becomes even more important just to have a lot of space that you can do all sorts of different movements and planes and that type of thing to develop their skills. Okay, let's just finish up here with a little more of what a typical week would look like. So there's going to be a couple ways that we're going to be delivering a lot of the golf fitness side of our golf performance coaches programs. One is going to be through weekly sessions at Edge Fitness with myself and Coach K. Karenvir, can you shed some light on maybe, let's say if we have a teenage athlete, what would you expect them to be doing in terms of work on their body in a weekly period in terms of, let's say, volume?
Sure, yeah. Normally, for someone that's around PHV or post PHV, we're looking at 2 to 3 training sessions per week is usually a good amount of volume. And then we want to also pick up that volume with their movement hygiene stuff and their daily correctives, which is a big part of the equation. But 2 to 3 focused training sessions is a good amount of volume. They usually would run anywhere from 45 minutes to 90 minutes or so. based off of the training goals and the particular athlete. So that would be, and even for pre-PH, I would say you want a similar type of volume, maybe slightly less, but obviously the emphasis there is going to be more on movement quality and getting them to really hammer down some of that movement hygiene stuff.
A pre-PHV athlete, we would strongly recommend that they at least have one other complementary sport that they're going to be playing throughout a given year. And I would guess that in an off-season period that should be predominant. What many of our players will be engaged in hockey or basketball or lacrosse, that type of idea, which places a little more demand on their schedule and also on their body. So we want to be very sensitive to that. When you're looking at a post-PHV player, if they have aspirations of playing college golf, they really should be doing just golf-related training. And that's where we get this much higher volume of work that should be done in the gym. But we can't emphasize enough this concept of movement hygiene, this daily constant monitoring of, am I moving today, and doing specific things built around how their body is at any given time in a given year, that they have got 5 or 6 different movement patterns that they know that they need to stay up on top of, whether it's a break from homework or whether they're doing it in front of their TV or when they wake up in the morning, literally at that same amount of time that you would be brushing your teeth. And it works very similar in that the more you brush your teeth, the better your mouth hygiene is going to be. So the more that you create these different movement patterns, the better your movement is going to be. You can't actually get too much of the movement hygiene standpoint. So that's a really key piece there. We're going to be allocating 2 days at Edge Fitness for our more of what we call our golf days. We're going to be Wednesday afternoon evenings and Saturday mornings are going to be the time where you would see at Edge Fitness a very high number of our golfers there. That being said, one of the really great pieces of Edge is that Coach Karamvir is the owner of the facility, and really, as a small business owner, spends countless hours at the facility. So it offers our players the ability to come in for a workout pretty much any time throughout the week other than Sunday, and Coach Karamvir would be there to oversee their training. So we've really decided to move in this direction with Edge and Coach K because it offers players countless number of available days where they can get their workout in, and no excuses for not coming. So I think that's a really, really key piece this year. The other option that we are providing is more of a self-guided option. So we appreciate that many of our players, depending on where they are located in the city, it might be tricky for them to get out to Edge. Rest assured, we still want to provide your son or daughter support, and how we're going to deliver that is a way prior to all of our team practices at Peak Performance Golf. The hour prior to the practice starting, I will be delivering a program that they can do on their own under our supervision in a way where maybe during our golf coaching sessions I can help them out and set up things that are on more of an online platform to help guide them. But they would really be doing the program on their own. It would be nowhere near as elaborate of what we were doing with the players at Edge, and as a result they probably will not get the same type of results out of it. But rest assured, that will be a very nice option and much better than going at something on their own or not doing anything at all. So we would strongly encourage that all of our players are engaging in one of those 2 options to ensure that over this next 6-month period that they are going to be spending time in the gym in a very, very productive way. And I can't emphasize enough, because I wear a couple different hats as a golf coach, instructor, and also someone who's got some background in strength and conditioning, that there is such a deep tie-in between what a player's body can physically do and what they can do with their golf swing. So this piece has such a big impact on their technical skills. And a lot of the time we prioritize that and to say, okay, well, I just love my son or daughter to work on straightening out their ball flight or improve their solidness of contact or whatever it is. And I think that's fantastic. It will be much harder for them to achieve the results that they're looking for unless they spend time working on their body. And during this time, where, as we mentioned, you've got things like this accelerated rate of growth in terms of peak height velocity and the fact that they're in school for so many hours, it's so important for them to be up on top of doing stuff in the gym or at home that's going to really improve their movement quality there. Anything to add on that, Coach K, before we open up some questions?
No, that was great. Let's get to the questions.
Okay, fantastic. So that would be the end of our presentation for this evening. And what you can do, anybody who's online, you may type any questions that you have into the little box that says chat there. And what I'll do is I'll read the question out loud, and Coach Karamvir and I will do the best of our ability to answer it. Anybody who's actually not online and is calling in, I'm more than welcome. You can actually text me a question if you want at 647-897-6178, and that would be another way where we can answer some questions. So we'll just open this up here, and if anybody's got any questions, let us know. Karamvir, it must mean that you and I have done a very thorough job of presenting the material this evening. And once again, I really want to thank you for coming on board this evening. And on behalf of John and myself, we really look forward to building a deep relationship with yourself and Edge Fitness. And we truly appreciate your expertise and the time you are going to be spending with all of our players over the coming months. And we really value what you do and your time and everything else. So thank you once again for joining us this evening. And I will, if I don't have any other questions, we'll sign off for the night. Thank you to all the parents who did spend some time and took the time to listen to what we had to share with you guys live. Please just take this as a starting point, and myself or Karamvir are more than happy at any point in time to discuss some of the themes on a more intimate level. And we really look forward to seeing your son or daughter this week at the Dome. We've got our initial coaching sessions starting up, both in the gym and from a skill standpoint at the Metrodome and Peak Performance Golf. So both myself and John are very, very excited to get going and looking forward to a great off season. So thanks again, Karamvir. Have a wonderful night.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.